Welcome back, everybody, and joining me for our first session to kick off TechOpps 2021 is Aidan Williams from Audinate. Just very briefly before we go into the interview, Audinate is the leading provider of professional digital audio networking technologies globally. The company's Dante platform, which I'm sure Aidan will talk about today, distributes digital audio signals over computer networks and is designed to bring the benefits of IT networking to the professional AV industry. The story of Audinate is the story of true game changers. In just a few short years, the company's Dante technology has altered the face of professional audio, from installed systems to live sound to studio recording and beyond. Aidan is the co-founder and CEO of Audinate, and he's got a very strong technical background, even an inventor on 20 patents relating to IP networking. I might ensure that I don't take too much of your steam, Aidan, so maybe if we can start today, that'd be great. And as a first question, and sorry, I should remind everybody, please, if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A facility, and to the extent we can include them in the conversation today, we'd love to. So maybe we can kick things off. Aidan, can you provide a quick overview of Audinate and your history with the company over the last few years?
Sure, I certainly can. And I'd like to add my thanks, I guess. Thanks for joining us this morning and taking the time to sort of tune in to find out a bit about what we do and who we are, that sort of stuff. So, and I appreciate the opportunity, Ron. So it's great to be able to be here. So Audinate, who are we? We are a technology company. So we're based out of Sydney, here in Australia. We make a networking technology that's called Dante, and we sell that networking technology to manufacturers of audio-visual equipment. So our customers are people like Bosch, Bose, Yamaha, a bunch of brands that you've heard of, but also a bunch of other brands you probably haven't heard of. And what our technology does is it allows audio-visual systems, the kind of things that the AV systems that people would put into a boardroom or into a railway station or into some kind of building. It allows those AV systems to basically run across the standard IT network that's already in the building. So there's a bunch of cost savings in terms of not having to run truckloads of extra cabling. You can run the whole AV system like it's a more of an IT thing than a sort of specialized thing. So that's the kind of nuts and bolts of what our technology is. In terms of my, history with the company, I go way back, even before Audinate existed as a company. So I happen to have a personal interest in music. I play a few musical instruments. I do various sort of production things from time to time, do things like recordings on computers and stuff like that. So the real sort of genesis behind Audinate originally was looking at what you have to do with AV, well, when you're playing music and you've got lots of musical equipment, you've got all these zillions of cables everywhere. You connect all the cables via some magic box to a computer, and then you basically do everything in software. So audio is no longer about recording on a tape like people did in the 80s, for example. It's all about getting stuff into a computer and then processing it, and almost everything happens in software now. So the real sort of light bulb moment was I have a very strong networking background, and I'd been working in commercial R&D in plug and play networking. So this is the plug it together, make it really simple to use. So I kind of, the light bulb moment was looking at all these wires, having to shovel them all into a computer, being a networking guy and going, you know what? This is really a networking problem. So if we could figure out how to develop the networking technology so that it was really easy to use, so a non-expert networking person could plug and play and make it, they could really use it easily, then I thought we had a product. And so that was kind of the genesis, and it sort of started there. So I was originally the CTO, founder at Audinate, and a couple of years ago I transitioned to CEO with the retirement of Lee Ellison, the previous CEO, of course, just in time for COVID, and then supply chain. So it's been a bit of a rough old ride for the last couple of years, but it's one way to learn a lot, that's for sure.
We might touch on COVID and supply chain a bit later, because I'm really interested. There's been a lot of coverage about chip shortages. Yeah. In fact, why don't we talk about it now, actually? There's been a lot of coverage about chip shortages. The company recently put a trading update. Can you give investors a sense of how supply chain feeds into the Audinate business? And then also importantly, the strategies you've implemented and are implementing to address some of the challenges that COVID has put to the business, and to ensure that you can continue that long-term growth trajectory that you've achieved up to date?
Yeah, for sure. So I think sort of COVID affects a whole pile of things, and all these supply chain things. If anyone says, there's one reason why, the supply chain issues are there at the moment, there really isn't one reason. It's a bit like some kind of air crash investigation. There's always this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So, all these things are very connected. So for us, I think we certainly saw a dip in demand through the whole COVID period because people were really unsure what was going on. And most recently, we've seen a kind of strong demand, really strong demand, as there's been sort of worldwide recovery. And that seems to have put quite a lot of demand pressure on chips and things. So people kind of stopped manufacturing and then they kind of roared back and then they started manufacturing again. You've probably read articles about this in talking about the automotive industry. So manufacturing of cars, cars stopped being manufactured. Now everyone wants to buy a car. They're all trying to get as many chips as they possibly can. And that means that there's just demand on chip suppliers. So that sort of thing is creating the sort of issues throughout the industry, and the entire supply chain for chips is a challenge. And now also we've got other sort of supply chain issues which are kind of COVID related as well. So factories will just shut down for a while they clean because of a COVID case, or alternatively, someone will make a local administrative rule somewhere and a factory will shut down for a few weeks because there's some kind of lockdown and they've decided not to do it. So we do have redundant manufacturing in mainland China and Malaysia, and that's stood us in pretty good stead because mostly one is running, even if the other one is not. In China now, we're starting to see things like blackouts as well. Regarding sort of managing chip shortages, I mean, the last trading update that we put out was really around one of our major chip providers. That's a company called Xilinx. They're like a top 30 manufacturer of chips around the world. They are what's called a fabless semiconductor manufacturer. So they design the chips, but they don't manufacture them. So it's a bit like Apple designing a phone, but getting it manufactured by Foxconn. So in this case, Xilinx has families of products. We happen to use one of their families of products called the Spartan 6 chip. And that thing is made at a silicon foundry in Korea, made by Samsung. It's a 45 nanometer foundry. So they're the people that actually make the chip. And that the number of chips coming out of that foundry for Xilinx has just radically dropped. We're not sure why. And so that's why we put out the trading update, because Xilinx has told us that they cannot supply chips to us until March next year. We're also, we're not sure what will happen after that with respect to can we return to run rate manufacturing. So, our response to that has been to move to basically accelerate the development of a drop-in replacement for our Brooklyn module. So that happens to use one of those parts. So we can do that electronics redesign, and we can manufacture a pin-compatible drop-in replacement for Brooklyn, and we'll probably have that up and running by Q4. That's the plan this year. And that will allow us to fairly rapidly switch our manufacturing customers using Brooklyn from the Spartan 6 dependent design to a new design that hopefully we can deal with from the supply side of it. We also do have a number of customers that have actually stuck Spartan 6s in their products, and we're working with them to try and transition them to other solutions as quickly as we can, and we'll be using any inventory we can get our hands on to try and manage and smooth that process through.
So it sounds like a speed bump rather than a structural problem, which is terrific.
Yeah, it's not a structural problem, and I would say the whole sort of chip shortage thing. I mean, there are some cyclical elements to it because of the way the semiconductor industry works. but it is the sort of thing where no one knows exactly when everything's going to come good, but no one believes that it's a permanent state of shortage. Yeah. Eventually things will equalize, we'll get back to some kind of equilibrium, and then we'll have the parts we need, I'm sure.
Great. So maybe we'll take a step back. The Dante audio product is seen as a de facto industry standard. How did the product evolve, and how have technological changes shaped Audinate's ability to penetrate the audio market?
Yeah, so when we began as a very much a small company, we had invented this technology. We did a bunch of demos. We had venture capital backing, and then it was a process of really going and selling that technology to absolutely everybody that we could at the time. And so right back in the beginning, there was certainly technological innovations that were part of the technology itself. So you mentioned patents. We have patents, IP, innovation, stuff like that. So there's really a series of key pieces of innovation at the beginning around making a standard, like your typical IT network. I mean, people's usual experience of IT networks is there's kind of delay and lag. You know, streaming applications don't start immediately. Things like Zoom have lag, you know, there's delays, all that sort of stuff. Whereas if you have an AV system with wires, it really is kind of instant. So the innovation in our technology was to make that networking technology behave as if somebody had ran a wire. So it was like indistinguishable from running a wire. And the other area of innovation was really making it easy to use, which sounds trivial, but making things simple is often quite hard. So I think we had the right package of the technology, the performance, and also the simplicity and the ease of use, so that, you know, your average ponytailed AV guy could plug this stuff together and get it to work, you know, easily and well. We certainly rode the technology curve in terms of gigabit Ethernet adoption. So network speeds going from 100 meg to gigabit, that sort of thing. We're also riding some other thematics as well. So a lot of the equipment that you buy these days in the professional AV industry, if you remember my computer analogy, where when I record something, I shove it in my computer, I don't do it on a tape machine anymore. So all sorts of equipment is now digital, like the computer is in the AV industry. So it's sort of weird to connect everything together with analog connectors. So there's a sort of thematic transition of the equipment is digital inside now. Networking is here, so it sort of makes much more sense to use networking to transfer the signals between the bits of digital equipment than it does to turn them all back into analog and run them over wires. So those sorts of thematics, I think, are happening in the industry, and I think we're in a great place, you know, company-wise, to be able to tap into that kind of analog to digital transition, analog cabling to networking transition, and then the kind of change of hardware or electronics, analog design of AV equipment into things that have a lot more software in the center of them.
So in terms of the Dante product, how is that differentiated from other products in the market at the moment?
Yeah, so there's the at the moment answer to that question, and then this is sort of how it began. So sort of 15 years ago, it was definitely differentiated on sort of technical specs, ease of use, stuff like that. But today, I would say that it comes back to that sort of de facto standard comment you made. We have a chart that we include in just about all of our presentation decks, which tracks the number of Dante-enabled products. So I think the key differentiation these days is associated with the ecosystem of interoperable products. So there's like 3,500 products out there at the moment from, you know, several hundred manufacturers who are all making Dante compatible products. Those things are all interoperable. So they all, it represents an interoperable ecosystem of products, and there's a network effect associated with that ecosystem. So it's a very winner take most, winner take all kind of market in that sense. So the biggest competitive barrier to entry we have today is that interoperable ecosystem of products, which is growing. And you can see that really in that chart where you see the number of Dante products continuing to grow and most of the other well, the other competitor products sort of flatlining. Yeah.
Thanks. So maybe we can touch on video for a minute. You've talked about audio. Obviously, the technology translates into video as well. With the launch of the video product, what's the biggest challenge for Audinate to replicate the success of its audio products in this new segment?
Yeah. I think it is a different market, and it's a more fragmented market. And in a sense, it's inherently fragmented for technology reasons. So so I probably should say, mostly with video signals, there's a huge amount of data that needs to be transferred from A to B. So video signals have vast amounts of data associated with them. And this is why people use compression technologies, because you've got to crunch all that data down to a small enough amount of data to be transmitted across an ordinary network. So what that actually practically means is that you've got a bunch of trade-offs associated with video. You can make it really cheap. So there's cost, there's the delay or the latency, there's quality, and there's bandwidth, the amount of networking technology that you use. So it's like a sort of four-dimensional. There are four sets of parameters that you can choose. So different manufacturers have chosen different sorts of solutions in video compression solutions, right from really fast, expensive networks with almost no compression to heavily compressed, poor quality, chipset solutions that are really cheap and cheerful, and kind of everything in between. And so that actually creates a bit of a challenge for interoperability, because the different kinds of compressions and codec technologies that are involved don't necessarily all speak the same language. And so for us, I think the challenge is working out how to use our networking technology in such a way that provides the maximum benefit to people that might be using one or more, slightly incompatible video technologies. So I think that's probably the main challenge, the fragmentation of the market. But I would also say that anybody that's got an AV product, a video product that has audio, wants to connect to the Dante ecosystem. So anyway, if they're sending audio to a networked device across the network, they'll probably be using Dante. So it allows us, we've got a good competitive advantage or a strength in all these guys wanting to use Dante audio. And so that gives us an ability to move into the video products off the back of the success on the audio side of things.
And on the video side, having sort of started, as you said, 15 years ago, you were in a very unique position in terms of where the technology was that Audinate had versus where the market was. Are you seeing something similar in video in terms of, you're starting a bit ahead of the curve and you're taking the learnings from audio and the skills you've brought up through that growth over the last 10, 15 years and moving it into that new video segment?
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things for us is certainly the old timers at Audinate is to remember what it was like back at that very beginning, and needing to do what you had to do. So think of it as almost like another startup where you've got to be desperate to get the customer win. You've got to adapt and change and things like that. So video, we don't have the sort of audio ecosystem strength and benefit that we have now. So we have to sort of realize that internally and understand that we have to fight for the design wins on the Dante side of things and really convince customers, do demos, go the extra mile to get it done. On the other hand, I lived through that experience of trying to establish a networking technology. I can tell you, like the analogy of if you think about the invention of the telephone. So Alexander Graham Bell invents the telephone. And I'm Alexander Graham Bell. I've invented the telephone, and I try and sell it to you, Ron. And I say, I got this great thing. You can call people and talk to them. And what's the first thing you say? You say, who do I call? It's like, I don't know anyone that has a telephone. Yeah. So this is the classic problem of the network effect. It's like once you've established the ecosystem, there's huge value in it. But getting there is really, really hard. So I think that's the sort of benefit of the Dante ecosystem, which I think we see transference, because we have the Dante audio stuff, we're certainly ahead, I would say, of where we were, like in the life cycle of Audinate as an audio company 15 years ago versus where we are with the video side. I'd say we're at least 3 years ahead of where we were in terms of numbers of people using the technology and companies adopting it.
And in terms of, I mean, technology companies are great, and the systems and the platforms and the software that they build is fantastic. But at the end of the day, it comes back down to, obviously, you need people and you need good people. How do you think about resourcing within the business? How do you think about it in a global context as well? Because Audinate is a global business. Can you give us some insights on that side of things?
Yeah, so we are growing. So we're almost at 150 people now, and we've had a plan to continue investing and growing. I mean, obviously in the video side of the business, but also just in making sure that we can scale and continue to manage the historic growth rates we've had have been that sort of 25 to 30% range. So we need to plan to keep growing like that, and that does rely on good people. It's certainly the case that it does vary quite a bit in terms of positions. I know sort of here in Australia, there's certainly pressure on things like engineering roles, sort of technical roles, and you know, with sort of extended border closures at the moment, we haven't got that sort of pipeline of you know, university students coming through. Immigration hasn't been happening, stuff like that. So it's certainly a challenging time at the moment for hiring, you know, particularly technical people in Australia. But as you said, we're also not a you know, Australia only company. So we did establish a team of people in Cambridge in the UK in the last financial year, and so that gives us an exposure to a different talent pool. And there's, you know, Cambridge is not a bad university, and there are some reasonable technical people that live, you know, in and around that kind of ecosystem associated with that university. So it does give us the ability to tap into that. So I think, you know, there will be a focus around sort of video development in that Cambridge, UK, you know, European type time zone and area. And one of the challenges for us is as we grow, it's, you know, it's always easy to have a small number of people who share an office to just sort things out by themselves. But as we grow, I think we need to put in place the structures that will allow us to, you know, develop products and delegate the development of those products around the world to different places like Cambridge, for example.
Great. I'm just conscious of timing. We've got a bunch of questions. We're not going to have anywhere near enough time to cover them all, but maybe
just try and shut up.
No, that's all right.
Shorter. Yes.
People want to hear from you, Aidan, not from me. So I'll try and cover a couple more questions with the time frame that we have. But first of all, what role do you see technology or innovation playing in the future of Audinate's product suite? Because you've been talking about how it's been growing over time. So can you paint a bit of a picture for us longer term?
Yeah, for sure. So the one way of looking at our business at the moment is you can sort of look at it through the lens of that TAM graph we have. There's sort of a $400 million TAM for audio, similar size TAM for video, and then there's another chunk in that graph which is really around software and services. So I think you know, we are a technology company and we live and die by innovation. So we obviously need to keep innovating. So our longer term strategy is really around taking advantage of the footprint of the networking we have to offer more software services for the management of AV systems just generally. So I think the way I would talk about it at the moment is we have this land grab going on where our existing business is really selling chips, cards and modules to every manufacturer and getting the technology built in. So that's that analog to networking kind of transition. And then the real upside, you know, the long-term upside for Audinate is the kind of software platforms and services that we can offer, so that instead of somebody buying an AV system by, you know, getting a box shipped to them and plugging it in, they can actually buy a bunch of microphones, connect them to the network, and then you know, buy the same functionality as a piece of software or a service. So we see that with technologies like voice over IP today. where you've got things like network telephones, but you buy a software service. And in the past, that used to be done by physical equipment. So I think that's the long-term where a lot of the innovation will come from in the future.
And then therefore, in terms of the business model and the revenue model, we should see then a growing proportion of SaaS revenues, recurring revenues coming through as you get more software into your ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that's the way to think about it. So right now we've got what we would call a repeat revenue model. So every time a manufacturer builds a Dante device, we sell a chip or a module or a royalty. So there is regular repeat revenue coming in at the moment. But in the future, it's likely to be new revenue streams around SaaS-style services, as you point out.
So I know probably last question, because we're about to hit the half hour, but a lot of fund managers always say, Aidan, what keeps you up at night? Whoever the CEO is, what keeps you up at night? I'm more interested, and our investors are more interested in understanding what excites you most about the opportunities that you see for the business.
Yeah, I think the thing that excites me most at the moment is starting to see, getting a video product out. That is a huge milestone for us, because we've been talking about it for many, many years, and it's a big effort to get a new product out. And as a sort of technical engineering person, I know how much code had to be written to get that thing to work. And the demo that we had with the Blue Note group and that kind of live across the internet thing, I think I got a lot of pleasure out of that too, because so many things have to work properly in order to be able to do that. So there's just so much stuff we've got in that toolbox that works, which is great. And the other thing I think that I'm really looking forward to is I can see our engineering team grow and scale. And so it's like the garden is getting bigger of the plants that are growing. And I guess I get to see them grow internally, because I can see stuff getting developed internally, and it's being built, and I can see that longer term vision and strategy really starting to come into fruition. So I think that's the thing I get most pleasure out of, but it's probably because I'm originally a sort of engineering technical person.
Well, Aidan, thank you so much for your candor and the conversation we've had today. I'm sure it's provided investors with a further insight into the business, the opportunities, and how you're thinking about that growth going forward. Looking forward to seeing you and the team deliver on those opportunities that are exciting you. And we'll watch out on further news flow as it comes out over time, and seeing the company continue to grow and cement itself as one of Australia's leading global technology success stories. So Aidan, thank you very much for your time this morning. And we'll now break and set up for the next session. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Aidan.
Thanks very much.